So right now, we would just like to give you a little bit of background on how the course was designed and the way that we designed the course so that you are comfortable and familiar with the way that the course was put together as the staff team. So essentially, our INTPT course is designed with a skills-based curriculum in mind. So just to give you a little bit of background on how courses are usually designed for those of you that may not be too familiar, the general way of designing courses are by developing some learning objectives and outcomes, right? Objectives are what we aim for the participant to learn, and then outcomes are measurable skills that we can test to see whether they've actually learned what we have set out for them to learn. So then objectives are generally just knowledge learned without any implementation. So these are generally the content that gets covered in a lecture component of contact sessions. And then the outcomes, like I've said, are skills that we can measure. And these typically will be covered during the practical assignment components of this course. So we have a skills-based curriculum, as I have said. So it's important for us that participants be able to go out and perform analyses once the course ends. And that's why we've done it this way. But to take it one step further now, with this course, we've also mapped all of these outcomes and objectives back to specific competencies. So we would like our students or participants to be at a certain level of competency or to have a certain set of competencies by the end of this training. And I will tell you a little bit more about what those competencies are for this course and how we mapped it. But firstly, let me give you a definition of what a competency is. This is a very, very basic definition. It doesn't span the entirety of how complicated competencies are, but I will put a paper into your staff resources that you can go and read to give you a little bit more background and understanding around competencies and how they are developed. But essentially, competencies are bundles of the essential knowledge, skills, and abilities required to achieve an acceptable level of performance, right? While learning objectives are usually specific to a course of instruction. So a learning objective is a very specific statement that describes exactly what a participant will be able to do in a measurable way after completion of the course. And then by accomplishing the objectives, which can be multiple, the individual develops necessary competencies. So a competency usually encompasses a range of learning objectives and outcomes. So it doesn't, the way that we test it is a little bit different to the way that you would test a specific outcome. But again, if it's very confusing at this point, do not worry. It will be explained quite nicely in the paper that I'll upload into your staff resources folders for day one. The way that we approach courses at HCA Baronet is that we work with personas. So for a particular persona, what is the minimum set of competencies that this persona should have by doing some of our courses? So many of you might be quite familiar with our Introduction to Bioinformatics course. That course was designed solely on the basis of this persona that you see in front of you here, which is a bioinformatics user, right? So bioinformatics user, they've just given an example of what the persona is. So here Leon he's on his second year of a postdoctoral fellowship working on a quorum sensing in bacteria. Right? So he's using a combination of transcriptomics, proteomics, and metabolomics to understand these pathogenic changes better. So he says that he ends up with big spreadsheets of protein or gene IDs, and he's just trying to piece together which signaling pathways are involved in flipping to the pathogenic state. Right? So he is a very introductory sort of level user, and they've just illustrated here on this slide the typical activities of a user. So they typically would just be prepping samples, doing some Q&A on the data analysis, and then interpreting some of their results. And essentially, this is the distribution between bench work and computational work. And you will see that bench work takes up 40% of his time and effort, while computational work takes up 60% of his time. And he has a preference for using a GUI over a command line. And you can see the preference is quite high over a command line. Now the next step is a bioinformatics scientist, right? So what would a bioinformatics scientist look like and do? So here's an example of a persona of a bioinformatics scientist known as Martha. So Martha is a senior bioinformatician in an international structural genomics consortium. Her biggest project is on predicting the functions of proteins whose structures have just been solved. She's building a structure to function prediction pipeline for the project. So the difference here is that Martha is building and testing pipelines, writing and testing algorithms, right? And she has a preference for command line over GUI, as you can see here. And her computational effort is much higher than her benchwork effort, right? So all of our participants for 16S will fall somewhere between the user and the scientist, right? They are not fully bioinformatics scientists, but they are a little bit more advanced than just a user, the Leon profile that I've just showed you. So keeping this in mind, we then developed a set of competencies alongside the trainers of the course that we would like our participants to achieve by the end of this course. Now, I'm not going to go into this at great depth because it can become a little bit confusing, but you can come back and look at the slide once you've read the paper that I pointed to in some of the previous slides, and that I said I would upload into your star folders as well. It might make a little bit more sense at that point. But just to give you an overview of some of the competencies that you'll gain or that the participants will gain throughout this course, these are some of them. So just some general biology, depth in at least one area of biology. Of course, with this course, we're doing the 16S microbiome. They will be able to obtain some details of the scientific discovery process and the role of bioinformatics in it. Biological data generation technologies will be covered, not at great depth, which is why you can see here that on the Bloom's taxonomy column of the table, I've listed various Bloom's taxonomies, right? So what this tells you is to what depth these competencies will be addressed at during the course. So for some of them, you'll go all the way to analysis and application, while with others, you will only need some comprehension. So you'll just need to be able to understand it fairly well. But again, I'm not going to confuse you too much, so I'll leave it at that for this lecture. Now, just to give you an overview of some of the modules that will be covered in this course, you'll see I have a little smiley face where Iman's photo should be. This is because I just didn't get a photo from her that she okayed in time for the shooting of this video, but she will introduce herself to you later on through the course, sorry. So the modules that we'll have throughout this course is the introduction to the command line in R. We'll do an introduction to the microbiome and study design. So why do we use 16S? We'll do some sample collection, extraction, and library prep for 16S NGS analysis. We'll give you some background theory on bioinformatics pipelines and this particular pipeline. We'll then do the 16S analysis pipeline with you and then also perform some downstream analyses in R. Now, Katie and Chantal, that you can see here on the slide, will be seeing you more than once, which is why I've just put little arrows here to indicate what they'll be teaching. But we have a really good set of trainers for this year, and we hope to expand the number of trainers that we have on the course for the next iteration as we go forward. But we have a really good team. They've put a lot of work into putting the content together, but then also on the technical front, getting all the infrastructure ready. Gerard has been giving us an enormous effort in that. He's been essentially leading that portion of things on his own. So we must give a big thank you to Gerard as well for his efforts. And he will be introduced to you a little bit later on today as well when you do the Meet the Core Team video, which we'll actually do right after this. So for more information on some of the course logistics, I want you to watch the next video, which is labeled Day 1, Part 4. But before you move on to some of those course logistics, seeing as I've just introduced some of the trainers to you, I think it would be nice for you to now watch the Meet the Core Team video. So go ahead and watch the Meet the Core Team video and then come back and do Day 1, Part 4. And we'll continue with some of the logistics for the course in that video.